Moro moro, and welcome back to Culinary Role-Playing. Today, my main idea was only to just test out this new camera setup, what I'm doing right over here with you can see my hands, and you see this little camera in front of me. And this is for one reason alone. I've been wanting to try to do a little bit more analog videos going forward with my How It Plays, and also with my new series coming up, Notebook Quest, where my whole idea is to do a lot of drawing, world building through drawing. I'm not a master drawer, so with that I've been wanting to want to inspire other people to go out and do a little bit more scribbling, because I think it's very good for your brain to take your eyes off the monitor for time to time, especially a lot of our everyday life, is it with pastime or with our work, school, what have you. We are quite a lot in front of computers, so I think this might be a nice change. And it's also good for your brain when you have to scribble things down a little bit. But I was like, hey, I could do something useful for you guys as well. Might as well when I'm building this setup. So today I wanted to make a little homebrew items, tips and tricks video for you guys. This just might be my algorithm, but I haven't seen that many tips and tricks video to homebrew. And even if there are many homebrew videos out there, I think this is a thing that, as many different explanations are out there, people benefit from it, because it's sometimes you just need the right person to say things in the right way for you, until it really clicks into your mind and you start to understand oh, this is how I'm supposed to do it. So this is how I homebrew stuff. Today I'm thinking about making the same magic item with 3 different systems. So we shall make one for 5e. You can use it with your different rule system, either the Dungeons and Dragons core rules or with Tales of the Valiant or something like that. Then we are going to do it with Dragonbane as well. And finally, we are going to do it with Savage Worlds as well. So you get 3 different kinds of systems, 3 different kinds of aspects, but still kind of being these kind of heroic fantasy adventure games. Before we get into the video, I just want to thank my Culinary Role-Playing Guild members once again, making possible for me creating these videos. And if you're interested, here's how you can do it. Just go down there and just cash yourself in and let your blood to the YouTube algorithm overlords and enjoy the ride. And something itches my back. What? Oh, right, that thing. Remember to do that if you're new here or something like that. But okay, whatever. Let's just go into the video. So first, before we get into the nitty-gritty of things, I want to share my 3 philosophies, kind of like my ideas, kind of my rules, how to approach homebrew making. And I would say rule number 1, make a good description. And what I mean make a good description is that before you start to do anything mechanical or anything that you are trying to bend into the rules of the system you are making the magical item or just homebrew item in, create this general idea and description of what you want the magic item to do. What is the intention of using this item? Because this can really help you out when it's time to balance the item. Because especially in these kinds of systems where you have lots of different feats, class abilities, edges, other skills, there's bound to be some kind of complication with different new kinds of items, some kind of combinations, some kind of synergies that completely might even derail the idea how the magic item was supposed to work. So when you have this clear, a good description what the magic item is supposed to do, you can always come back to the description and even openly state, if you are playing with a group, for example, and you are the GM, you can say, okay, this is what I intend the magic item to do. And if it starts to do like completely something that it's outside of the whole idea what the magic item was supposed to do, then you can balance it out and say, okay, this was the description, and you can use it as a support in a sense that you have also the context and description of the item. You don't just have random stats and power-ups into one item. Then you players might question that, like, why you are changing things now. Nevertheless, players should always respect the GM's balancing ideas, but I think it's also GM's responsibility to explain the situation, like why I'm doing the changes that I'm doing. So yeah, make a description, make a good description of the item beforehand. Then you have like also a clear design goal in mind as well. Rule number 2. It is always, I think it's only with one L, sorry about that. It's always good to have reference. Use a lot of references. See how especially the designers of the systems have made things. See other things that might be there. Because especially in the homebrew world, if somebody has already made the work, you don't have to do it again. Do it if you enjoy it. Do it especially if you just love to do a lot of work and just want to design everything from scratch. Definitely do it. But you don't have to. Most of the time you can find the item already done and you can just maybe change the name, change the element that the item is using. I'm phrasing a lot of magical items, by the way, but especially I want to underline, you don't have to make magical items. Like, okay, that's a different that's a different conversation, but especially like if you have a +1 item, you could definitely just say it's not like anything magical, it's just a very good sword, it's a very good shield, it's a very good time watch. You can have +1 compass to your survival skills. Like, you know, it doesn't always have to be magical, the reason why it's like better. And the same rule goes for items as well. Some items might have special effects even though they are not magical. But anyway, my point is, use a lot of reference. This also helps out the first part when you are thinking about balancing your items, because you can really see how different aspects of other items have been balanced, like damage wise and utility wise, and how many times you can use an item. So what I would normally do, I would find an item, like if I'm making something really specific, I would try to find something that is really close to the item, like that I only need to change maybe 1 or 2 things and I get what I want. That is the easier and most efficient way to make a new item. And finally, my rule number 3, which is the rule of 3, conveniently enough. And what I mean by this is that I would want to say the most legendary magical items should have only the maximum of 3 different aspects. When the items start to have even more different aspects, it really can get taxing for the player to remember everything that they can do with this item. And just like description wise and flavor wise, it's always more interesting to have an item that does 1 or 2 things really well. So usually when I build magical items, they only have 2 or 3 aspects at most. And even having 3 aspects can be quite a lot. And usually the 3rd aspect might be something, well, not necessarily always negative for the user, but definitely something that could really be dangerous or risky to use. 2 positive aspects and 1 negative aspect. With these 3 rules starting out, you can get really far already. Like, this is already everything you need for any system at all. Like, this is all you need. Think about what the magical item does before you start to push it on any mechanics. Then when you have the description in your mind, reference, see what is out there that might be very similar to your item. And finally, trim it down to maximum of 3 different kinds of aspects. So it's still manageable and interesting. And now a bonus. Now I have a bonus rule, and this is only my opinion, so that's why it's not in these core rules. Damage is boring. Yeah, in my humble opinion, damage in magic items is really boring. Like, I have a sword that does extra damage. Cool. I have a wand that sends out a magical missile that does some damage. Okay. Like, damage is normally something you have with regular weapons and items anyway. So having a magical item or a special item that does just more damage might be useful, and the first time the character gets the item, they might be, oh yeah, cool, this does damage. But soon it just becomes another item in their inventory. But whenever they have a special item, they have boots that will disrupt gravity. Like, they will click the boots together and suddenly everything around them, including themselves, just start to float in the air in this kind of space where there is no gravity at all. It doesn't do directly damage, like I said, directly damage, but it definitely becomes an aspect, an item that anytime the player uses it, everyone else will be like, oh, okay, here we go again, this is that item, like, we have that item. And then it will become this kind of tool on different situations where the players will always think about, should we do the trick? Should we do the thing? So to my mind, that is always much more interesting than having a flaming sword that does 1d6 extra damage. Use your bonus action to ignite it. But yeah, this is the basic premise for me personally, how I want to create magical or interesting homebrew items in different systems. So I have a lot of maps in here, it seems. Here we have an empty space. Let's divide this in 3 sections where we will make the same item 3 times using 3 different systems. And just to make this kind of demonstration exercise, I will just go from top of my tome and just try to start creating an item. So here we have 3 different columns that we can make our magic item in. But first we need the description. And let's do something basic relating to fantasy. So we shall make a magical item, and let's make something that we kind of all of us have some kind of idea what it could be. Let's start with the frost sword. Really simple, really classical frost sword. So we shall call it the Sword of the Winter King. So what we want the sword to do, something probably relating to cold, ice, frost. Let's make it interesting. Let's give the sword 2 aspects that are kind of beneficial for the player, and then let's give it 1 negative or risky aspect. So let's just say, for starters, when you strike with the sword, it will start to freeze targets in place. So very simple. It has the possibility when you strike with the sword to really like start to suck all the warmth out of your targets and effectively maybe froze them in place in the most extreme cases. That is one aspect. And maybe one interesting aspect would be that it freezes water on touch. That's the second aspect. And now the third aspect that can be risky and negative as well. Maybe it can close the user in ice. Might enclose the user in ice. There we go. Now we have the basic description premise for the Sword of the Winter King. When you strike with it, it has the possibility to freeze your targets in place. It starts to freeze water when it gets touched with the water, and then on some cases it might enclose the user in ice. So in 5e, the closest thing we have a frost sword is, I think it was called the Frost Brand, which just basically gives the sword plus d4 to the attacks. And I think that's kind of boring. We don't want to do that. Instead, there's not many direct rules that people froze in place. There are some spells that kind of like froze people in place, but not really. But what we do have in 5e mechanics that could be quite similar is petrification. So one aspect in 5e, we could have this long sword, which means it's d8 or d10 depending on do you use it on one or two hands. And having this kind of attacks with additional effects, we can already see from many class abilities that usually if it's some kind of great effect, it should only be effective once per round. So let's say once per round. So once per round, when you hit a target with the sword, they have to make a DC, let's just say a con save, or have their movement halved. So now in the first round, when the attack hits, additionally the enemy has to make a con save or they are starting to freeze up. And this is basically adding an cantrip kind of effect. I think we can also add for the first round, like simulating that feeling of like starting to freeze up. The target will lose half of their movement and lose their reaction because they are not that reactive anymore. And I think with 5e, with the petrification, the idea is that if you lose the first save, you get partial like negative effects, and if on the next round you lose the save again, then you get petrified. And I would think that would work well here as well. So once per round, when you hit the target with the sword, they have to make a Constitution saving throw or have their movement halved and lose their reaction. On their next round, if they fail their save again, they will be petrified in ice. Petrified, aka frozen in place. So now, very, very powerful item on the first look. Being petrified is really hard for your character. That means you are basically out of the action, and if there is no way for your friends to return to you to normal, you're done. But what is different with this, I actually don't have enough space. So let's continue this to the next page. Petrification will end if fire is used or in direct sunlight for 1 hour. And there we go. We are making kind of extreme example here, but again, it's three aspects. When you hit someone, they will freeze. When you will put the sword on water, the water freezes, and in extreme cases, you will get encased in ice. And like for example, this is already a legit item. You could just end it here. You don't have to make this mega complex things. When you start to make magic items, start simple. Now I just wanted to make like this kind of extreme example of how to make these kind of multi-aspect legendary items. I actually will change this word to swords effect, so you can already end the first stage of the sword's effect if you use fire or sunlight. So in these cases, it's just easier if you fail the saving throw, you can just basically burn yourself with the torch, or your friend can warm you up or something like that. I would probably leave out the frozen water on touch for now from 5e because it's already starting to be quite rules heavy item. But what we will add is whenever user of the sword rolls a 1 on their attack roll, they will immediately be petrified and be enclosed in ice. Ice has, let's say, 13 AC and 30 HP. This effect ends when the ice is destroyed. Vulnerability on fire. So fire does double damage. And I think that's it. That's a lot of text, but the sword has two aspects. It can either freeze your enemies in place, or it can freeze you in place. This is definitely a legendary item, which will definitely be a campaign defining item. But like I said, I want to create items that people will definitely remember to use, and they will always be thinking about them. I won't give them many of these items. They will probably have this kind of item of 1, maybe 2. This is a character defining artifact. It has huge benefits, but also it has huge downsides. But I would definitely give enemies with resistance to cold damage advantage to this save, and enemies with cold immunity wouldn't not be even affected from this weapon. So yeah, I could also add the effect that it will freeze water on touch, because that will always be difficult for players now. If they have to like cross water or dive deeper, they can't take the sword with them because it will just start to freeze up the water. But yeah, definitely two huge things that the sword can do, but it doesn't give any more damage. And the higher level you go in 5th edition, the probability that you will hit the enemy even once is quite likely. But it is only once per round, and that means you can only affect 1 target per round with this. And they need to make 2 failed saves before they get petrified, and also they can be saved only with fire, which is quite generally attainable for different kinds of characters. So overall, very interesting, very good, but also very risky item. Because sometimes rolling the 1 might save your character's life, but sometimes you could get frozen in place in the wrong time, and you will need your friends to get you out of there. And that's how I love my items to be. I want magic items to be like the extra thing that the heroes will carry, and they will usually use their normal sword, but they will be always thinking, is now a good time for me to use the sword? Will I need the power to use it now? And what is the cost if I roll that 1? So yeah, that's how I would see it in 5th edition. In Dragonbane, we don't have many magical items from the system. The system explains how you can create magical items by using the magics within the system. But we start the same way. We have longsword, and I think longsword, was it 2d6 or 2d8? I think it was 2d8 damage. And what we have to take into account within Dragonbane is that we only have 1 action or 1 attack per round throughout the whole game. And what we can also utilize are willpower points, which usually fuel everything you do within the game. So I would say, because we will use willpower points, enemy don't necessarily need to make a save. We can just say when you hit with an attack, which is already like you have to use your action even to attack, and the enemy still has the chance to parry the attack because it's a regular attack, so there is a defense involved. So by spending 3 willpower points, because it is a big weapon with big ability, and most bigger ability usages in Dragonbane cost 3 willpower points. But what we do have in Dragonbane, we have Frost spell already, and the Frost spell states it's an area of effect, but basically it gives the effects of coldness or cold, which means individuals lose 1d6 health and 1d6 willpower points and cannot heal those until they are warm again. And it also states that targets have to succeed on a strength roll, or they can't move or take actions. And I think that is perfect for our longsword in here. So by spending 3 willpower points, you infuse your attack with freezing energy. And I think in this case, we have to spend the energy before we make the attack. And if you then hit with this attack, it will deal additional 1d6 HP and 1d6 WP as per rules with cold. In addition, target must succeed on a strength check or be frozen in place. No move or action for that round. I would say after which they can take and try the save again on the next round or be completely frozen until defrosted, I guess. There we go, the same effect. And now we will also add the negative aspect. When using the sword's ability, if the attacker rolls a demon, they are immediately frozen in place and enclosed in ice. And this ice actually could have hardness, because in Dragonbane the items have different kind of hardness level, and if damage succeeds that hardness, the item will break. So the ice casing could actually have a hardness. Let's say it has hardness of 14, and again double damage from fire. Here we go. And for Dragonbane, I think this can be a little bit loose. This is just me now working on it. Of course, I would still like trim down the details and actually make it more readable. This is just me now demonstrating, so bear with me. But I think the idea is there. Again, we have the same effect. Very huge sword attack that does amazing things, especially in Dragonbane when most enemies and heroes have only one action. So this can be a devastating legendary weapon. That still has the downside, because you will roll that demon sometimes, and being taken out or being like completely frozen in place, it can really it really makes you useless for some time. And I really enjoy that it basically you can really take yourself out from the situation. So most of the time people will definitely think about, will they use this ability? In Dragonbane you have the benefit that you don't have to all the time use the ability, because you have to use willpower points to use it. So you can just use it as a sword and think about the moments you want to use the power. But this is what I really enjoy. I like to make powerful items that have a really big trade-off. like they can really swing the tide of the battle one way or another. And yes, it has now additional damage, but still I would argue that the effect of freezing someone in place it's much more valuable in the long run compared to that extra dice of damage. I could effectively take the 1d6 HP and 1d6 willpower out of this item and it still would be quite powerful to use. Yeah, with minor tweaking, but I'm quite content with these two. So we can go into the final system. And now with Savage Worlds. Savage Worlds is kind of simple in a way that it's very universal system already. So it only provides us some extra neat things that we can then manipulate into our own will. But Savage Worlds naturally doesn't have that many magical items or special items in that sense, but we can make one. So again, we have sword with sword stats, and in addition to that, I would say when Savage Worlds, you really hit a creature like deeply when you wound them. And the idea for this Frostblade was to that when you really get into the skin of the enemy, basically, then you really start to make an effect. So I would say when you at least hit an enemy through their toughness. So they have to get at least shaken. When you have at least shaken an enemy, they have to make a vigor roll or be stunned. And I think the stunned effect was the closest in Savage Worlds that was like basically emulating the feeling of freezing up. Like you can't take any actions and your movement is 0 basically. And again, in the next round, if the target fails another vigor roll, they are completely frozen in place. So what I'm doing here, again, I'm basically using Savage Worlds' power rules that will give me a lot of like insight on what kind of effects different weapons could have, like different magical weapons. You can just add powers to them. And this is basically like a trimmed down version of the stun spell or stun power. And its trappings would be also, of course, ice and frost. So then you could easily use, again, fire to say that, okay, it has double the effect against like frozen things, like you use trappings in Savage Worlds. And again, we can add the negative effect if attacker fails critically. So wild card, snake eyes and extras roll 1. So if extras use this sword, it's always just with a roll of 1, and that can happen quite a lot. So it's beautifully chaotic. The user is immediately frozen in place and encased in ice. And the ice could have toughness of, let's say, 13. It is really tough ice. And again, fire can do double the damage. So while it's really difficult to get the ice open with the sword, quite simple enough to get it with the fire spell. And I mean, that's it. I kinda left out the freezes water on touch, but I realized at the moment I was creating it that it's gonna be too much to have in this weapon. If we like mechanize the addition of like it will freeze water on touch. That can be something to be determined by the GM, how that could affect things. It could still be within the weapon's description, but maybe not necessarily include that into the mechanics. But yeah, that's how I want to create items, they have to mean something. Just finding a random blade of blade of ice damage +1 plus d4 frost damage per attack, like it doesn't do anything for the player. Like, yeah, it's cool for the first 5 seconds, but like they will quickly forget even the weapon they are using. When magical item becomes mundane while using, I think it's not that magical. I really want to always create items that feel special from the beginning to the end, and they are dangerous to the enemies and possibly to the users as well. It always contains a risk. With great power comes with great responsibility, but that should be the case. And that makes magical items memorable. That it will be always a wager on when should I use it. And when they are using the item, god damn, it should feel powerful. But as well, it could be like, no, the worst happened and now I'm encased in ice while my friends are down as well and I can't help them and now everything is lost. Okay, that went dark fast. But my idea is that it always should include a risk as well. It should always be a wager when to use the item. That makes the item memorable, that makes the item legendary and something to chase after and be afraid to use it. And that, I think that is the most important design aspect. But that's it. Hopefully that gave you some ideas on how to create different magical items or items in your table of role-playing games, either solo or with a group. This is something I really like. This is the process how I do it. There are a million different types. And for some people, my weapons would be like too powerful, or sometimes some might argue that, well, if you can just use the sword and freeze in place, like, I don't want to use that weapon. I would just say, good, don't use it, it's dangerous. But if you use it, you have been warned. But that's all for me today. Thank you for watching and leave comments down below. What are like your special homebrewed items, either magical or non-magical items that you have created for your games? I definitely want to hear a lot of inspiring homebrew that I could possibly use in my games. Because sharing is caring, and definitely use anything you see in my videos to your advantage in your tables if you feel like you would benefit from that. I will definitely look up a lot of your guys' homebrews and maybe even use them at some point. But that's all for me today. Now it's moro moro and I hope I see you next time.